notes and not the Bible. It's the same thing. Our scripture lesson is taken from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 5, verses 21 to 43. Jesus had gone over to the other side of the lake and healed and is now on his back. When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered around him, and he was by the sea. Then one of the leaders of the synagogue, named Jairus, came. When he saw him, fell at his feet and begged him repeatedly, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, so she may be made well and live." So he went with him, and a large crowd followed and pressed in on him. Now there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians and had spent all that she had, and she was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, for she said, "If I but touch his clothes, I shall be made well." Immediately her hemorrhage stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately aware the power had gone out from her, Jesus turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" And the disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing in on you, and you say, 'Who touched me?'" He looked all around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." While he was still speaking, some people came from the leader's house to say, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the leader of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." He allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the house of the leader of the synagogue, he saw commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. When he had entered, he said to them, "Why do you make a commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. Then he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha kum," which means, "Little girl, get up." And immediately the girl got up and began to walk about. She was 12 years of age. At this they were overcome with amazement, and he strictly ordered them that no one should know this, and told them to give her something to eat. So now I'm going to retell you what I just read, with some of my additions. Jairus was the leader of the synagogue, who took his responsibility seriously. From time to time, itinerant rabbis would appear and be invited to preach at the Sabbath service. Sometimes their reputation would precede them, and that would determine their welcome. Jairus was one of those who made judgments. Are they preaching sound doctrine? Well, Jesus had been invited to preach in the synagogue more than once, and Jairus just wasn't too sure. Once, when he was preaching, a man with an unclean spirit managed to sneak into service when everyone's eyes were on Jesus. He yelled out, "What business do you have to do with us, Jesus Nazarene? I know what you're up to. You're the Holy One of God, and you've come to destroy us." Well, Jesus shut him off. "Quiet, get out of him." The afflicting spirit threw the man into spasms, protesting loudly, and got out. Everyone had been astonished, including Jairus. But he was also deeply disturbed. What sort of person was that to whom the demon spoke so openly? What was the source of his power over the demon? Was that power from God or from other demons? It was bad enough for Jesus to heal on the Sabbath when the man with the demon challenged him openly. It was another thing to deliberately heal on the Sabbath when he could have waited until sundown to do the work. Jairus remembered a time when a man with crippled hand was present at the service. He watched to see if Jesus would heal him, which was against the Sabbath laws. Jesus said to the man with the crippled hand, "Stand here where we can see you." Then he spoke to the people. What kind of action suits the Sabbath best? Doing good or doing evil? Helping people or leaving them helpless? No one said a word. Jesus said, "Look at Jairus and the other rulers in the eye, one after another, angry, furious at their hard-nosed religion. He said to the man, "Hold out your hand." He held it out. It was good as new. Jairus wondered how they could let a teacher who so frequently broke the Sabbath laws continue to preach in the synagogue. I mean, Jairus really wanted the people to follow the Torah faithfully. And yet when Jesus preached, he said things like, "You have heard it said, but I say unto you." Who does Jesus think he is anyway? By what authority does he change the sacred laws? Jairus decided that Jesus was dangerous. The crowds loved him. How could he keep them from following Jesus? Jairus wanted nothing to do with Jesus unless it was getting rid of him. He felt so strongly in that subject, he persuaded the other leaders to withdraw their invitations to Jesus to preach in the synagogue. And they said, "Well, Jairus, if that's what you want, then we'll go along with it, but you're the one that has to tell Jesus." And so one day Jairus stopped and told Jesus he was no longer welcome to preach in the synagogues. Jesus was hurt, but informed him that the crowds were too big for the synagogue anyway, and he would preach by the lakeshore or some other place from then on. Well, Jairus had other worries. The people in this story are unnamed. The women, I'm giving them names. His only daughter, Dorcas, was 12. She'd been a sickly child all her life and was not yet mature enough to marry. Jairus had made arrangements with a friend of his who had a handsome son and couldn't wait until Dorcas was well enough and mature enough to marry. But lately, her bouts of sickness had gotten worse. His wife kept nagging at him, "Why don't you go ask Jesus? Jesus could heal her." But Jairus was too proud. I mean, he told Jesus he was no longer welcome. Is he now going to go and beg to him to heal his daughter? No. He knew that Jesus had amazing healing powers and many of his congregation had been healed, but he had his pride. Yet his daughter kept getting worse, and his wife kept nagging and nagging him. And finally, when it seemed that she was close to death, Jairus' love for Dorcas got the best of his pride. And so he went down towards the lake shore wondering if Jesus would be there, because he had been there a few days earlier and then had left. And he didn't know whether he'd come back, and while he was gone, there had been a tremendous storm while his boat was out on the lake, so no one knew what had happened to him. And, Jairus had been not very nice to Jesus last time they met. But Dorcas was so precious, he must heal her. In the meantime, in the outskirts of town, lived Deborah. She was an inquisitive child and wondered why the boys got to go to school while the girls had to stay home. Why couldn't the women sit next to the men in a synagogue? And if the men and women were created equal, why was a woman unclean for 33 days after the birth of a boy and 66 days after the birth of a girl? Why was a sin offering as well as a burnt offering required after the birth of any child? Was it sinful to give birth? If menstruation was a normal part of a woman's life, why was she unclean during her flow of blood? Her father couldn't answer her questions except to say that God was just. Deborah thought that God's justice only extended to men, which was grossly unfair to women. Well, she was 12. Her father arranged a marriage to a good man. A year later, she gave birth to a son. Her husband was good to her, and that year was the happiest in her life. But when the afterbirth came out, she felt something tear in her body. The midwife did the best she could, but the flow of blood never completely stopped from giving birth. So she remained ceremonially unclean. Anyone who touched her would become unclean. And if the bleeding did stop, then she would have to go to the priest and bring a sin offering before she would become clean. The flow of blood rose and fell, even stopped for a few days at a time. Occasionally she would feel help, think, "No, now, I can go." And then flow started up again. No one could help. Her husband took her to midwife and to other doctors. And after a while, he divorced her because he couldn't stand being unclean all the time, touching her, and took the son away from her because he didn't want his son to grow up unclean. So she lived alone on the outskirts of town. She did have some friends. One of them went to the market for her, another went to the well for her. The villagers shunned her in general. They didn't want to touch her and be unclean. Deborah was weak from the flow of blood, but her husband did give her some money to support her. And when she had enough money and she heard about another doctor, she would wash her clothes and go to the next town to see the other doctor. And the doctors would look at her, prescribe something, and she'd go home, and for a while it would make her better, and then things got worse again. And all she did was spend her money. So she ended up worse off than before. And after 12 long years of this, Deborah had run out of hope. Finally, she prayed the prayer of resignation. If you want me to live this way the rest of my life, God, it's all right with me. I leave my life in your hands. And for the first time in 12 years, she felt inner peace. A few weeks later, a neighbor told her about a new preacher healer who had come to town. She said the healer had compassion on those who were sick and neither turned them away nor charged them for his services. She suggested maybe Jesus could help Deborah. She talked on and on about Jesus. Hope rose again in Deborah's breast. She began to believe that all she had to do was touch the fringe of his garment and she would be healed, if she could get close enough to touch him in the crowds. She washed herself and her garments and resolved to try. The next day dawned bright and clear. Fishermen had been working all night, came back with the news they'd seen the boat Jesus was in, and it was headed their way. News of Jesus' pending arrival spread quickly through the town. Soon crowds were gathered at the lake shore to welcome him. When Jesus arrived, he saw this huge crowd. At the sight of them, his heart broke. They were like sheep with no shepherd. He went right to work teaching them. Jairus heard the news that Jesus was back and ran to the lake shore. Full of worry for Dorcas, he fell at Jesus' feet. "Forgive me for ever doubting you," he cried. "Oh, my Dorcas, my dear daughter is at death's door. Please, please, please come and lay hands on her so she will get well and live." Jesus went with him, and the whole crowd tagging along, pushing and shoving. Jairus was impatient, but the crowds prevented them from moving any faster. As they moved along, Deborah found the crowd and knew Jesus was in the middle of it. She was so desperate, she didn't care who she touched or who she made unclean. Slowly, she made her way through the crowd. Mary Magdalene noticed her and saw the look of desperation on her face. She helped part the crowd so that Deborah could get closer. She volunteered to introduce her to Jesus, but Doris demurred. "Don't bother the master. All I have to do is touch his garment, and I shall be healed." Finally, she reached him from behind and touched his robe. The moment she did it, the flow of blood dried up. Deborah could feel healing power go through her and knew she was healed of her disease. Full of joy, she was about to slip away as she had come and go tell her neighbors. But Jesus was immediately aware that power had gone out from him. He turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my garment?" His disciples said, "What are you talking about? With this crowd pushing and jostling you, you're asking who touched me? Dozens have touched you." But he went on asking, looking around to see who had done it. Deborah, knowing what had happened, knowing she was the one, stepped up in fear and trembling, knelt before him and gave him the whole story. Jesus said to her, "Daughter of Sarah, your faith has made you whole. Go in peace." Jesus grasped her hand and lifted her to her feet. He proclaimed her clean without waiting for the ritual purification. She went home rejoicing with family and friends. Jairus was impatient. What if Dorcas dies before Jesus gets to her? Just as Jairus had feared, while Jesus was still talking, some people came in from the leader's house and told him, "Your daughter is dead. Why bother the teacher anymore?" Jairus burst into tears, but Jesus overheard what they were talking about and said to her, "Don't listen to them. Just trust me. Jesus permitted no one to go with him except Peter and James and John. They entered the leader's house and pushed their way through the paid mourners who were weeping and wailing loudly. He said to them, "Why do you make a commotion and weep? The child isn't dead, she's sleeping." They laughed at him. But when he had sent them all out, he took the child's father and mother, along with Peter, James, and John, and entered the child's room. He again broke purity laws by touching the dead body. Jesus clasped the girl's hand and said, "Talitha kum," which means, "Little girl, get up." At that she was up and walking about. The child, the girl, was 12 years old. Those in the room were beside themselves with amazement and joy. Jesus gave them strict orders not to tell anyone what had taken place. Then he said, "Give her something to eat." Jairus' wife rushed to prepare some food, while Jairus resolved to call a meeting of the leaders of the synagogue and tell them he had changed his mind and would welcome Jesus at any service and would gladly hear him preach. Two women looked down upon by their society. Rabbis in those days thanked God that they were men and not women. Bleeding women, sick girls, who cared about them? For 12 years, both families would have done their best to get the healing they needed through prayer and through the doctors of their day. But it wasn't enough. In their desperation, they turned to Jesus, fighting crowds to get to him. And Jesus provided the needed healing. But healings take place on many levels. Deborah was restored to her family, to her friends, and her community, and could now lead a life of dignity. And perhaps she became one of the women who ministered to Jesus in his travels. We don't know. Dorcas was now well enough to mature and become old enough so that she could marry and live the life of a woman expected in her day. Those two were cured. But there's more than just cured when it comes to healing. Jairus was healed too, but this wasn't a physical healing. This was more of a spiritual healing. He was healed of his suspicion of Jesus. He realized that sometimes the old rules set up barriers against God and others instead of bringing them to God. Jairus would continue to take his leadership role in the synagogue seriously, but he wouldn't use the letter of the law as a weapon against others. He became more compassionate and less judgmental. Healing can take many forms. It sometimes includes physical healing, but not always. And at Monroe Community Hospital, I asked them, "Do you believe in healing?" And they'll say, "Yes, we do." And these are people with long-term chronic medical conditions. But for many of them, Jesus has healed them spiritually, healed who they are, so that they can continue to live lives of dignity and peace, even in that dreaded nursing home. And we thank you that God is still in the healing business, even today.